What are some of the biggest mistakes sellers making in this process?
The idea that they're 60 years old, they want to retire at 65, and what they decide to do is, I'm going to work 5 more years, but I don't want to work this doggone hard. I think I want to drop down to 3.5 days a week, maybe 3 days a week. Now we have this downward trend, and the banks are basically saying, I see this downward trend, but I don't know where it's going to end. Sellers end up selling their practices for much less, in these cases. That's a major problem.
What are buyers looking for when they're looking for a practice?
What is the cash flow of this practice? They're also looking at this practitioner saying, okay, can he handle this workload of the practice? We might have a practice that, is doing 30% specialty work, and that doctor coming in is not capable of doing that. The bank probably won't lend on it.
Should I buy the house first, or should I buy the practice first? If you buy the house first, then you're going to be very limited to the number of practices that you can go after.
We have so many great rural practices that are cash flowing like crazy, and that buyers don't want to be there.
Are you a dentist who's striving to build a more thriving, profitable practice without feeling overwhelmed by the numbers? Hey, good news, there is a better way. The Academy of Dental CPA member firms know dentistry. In fact, it's all they do. Our members are experienced CPA firms who specialize exclusively in serving dentists across every stage of ownership. From startups to acquisitions, to optimizing associate income, to advanced tax strategy, practice growth, and transitions, we're here to support your financial success. When you work with an ADCPA member, you get more than a tax preparer. You get a strategic partner, someone who understands dental industry benchmarks, overhead management, collections, dental insurance, compensation models, and all the unique business challenges you face every single day. We bring clarity to the business side of dentistry. While you focus on clinical excellence, we ensure your financial foundation remains strong with advisory that turns data into confident decisions. Join over 11,000 dentists nationwide who have a financial expert in their corner. Visit adcpa.org to find a trusted dental CPA near you. That's adcpa.org, because your numbers should work as hard as you do.
This podcast is sponsored by Bank of America Practice Solutions. When you need financing for your dental practice, you really want to work with someone who fully understands your industry. For over 25 years, Bank of America Practice Solutions has helped dentists across the nation reach their goals through smart financial solutions and expert guidance. Whether you own a practice or are just getting started, Bank of America Practice Solutions can provide customized financial help for your short-term needs and long-term aspirations. Email dg.connect@bofa.com to find expert guidance, personal attention, and real solutions. That's dg.connect@bofa.com. And hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Art of Dental Finance and Management podcast with Art Wiederman, CPA. I'm your host, Art Wiederman. Welcome to the podcast. Today, our subject is dental transitions. And this is a subject, doctors, when we do a podcast on transitions, which we've done some over the, coming up on 7.5 years that we've done this podcast, I always say, now, if you're a 30 or 40-year-old doctor that owns a practice, don't turn this off, because you never know what's going to happen in life. We've seen clients sell practices in their 30s and 40s because of, health issues, or because of, they want to do something different. I mean, we see all kinds of reasons. So you always need to be prepared to know how this works. And my guest today is Dan Van Eps, who is the Senior Director of Transition Services at Henry Schein Dental Practice Transitions. I can't think of a better human to talk about. I've known Dan for well over 20 years in his past life. And we're going to talk about what's going on in the market, what you should be doing as a seller, what you should be doing as a buyer to get ready for your transition. But before we do that, I want to ask all of you to please follow us on all of the social media outlets, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. We have a YouTube page where you can see these podcasts on live and in color. I, again, put on a nice shirt, which is a good thing, I guess, and also on TikTok. So please follow us. Please tell your friends about us. I want to thank our wonderful, wonderful sponsors, Bank of America Dental Practice Solutions, the top bank in dental lending out there. The Academy of Dental CPAs, my home team, helped form them. This is our 25th anniversary, 25 years ago. We represent over 12,000 dentists, and they are this is the official podcast of the Academy of Dental CPAs. And Interview, which is an amazing new dental device that you should take a look at. So with that said, let me go to my good friend, Dan Van Eps. Dan is, again, Senior Director of Transition Services at Henry Schein Dental Practice Transitions. They have a nationwide dental transition service. How you doing today, Dan?
I'm great, Art. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Where am I talking to you? I should have asked this before. Where are you today?
I am a native of Colorado, and I'm sitting in my office right now. As you see, a little bit of the Western background. I kind of
I do see that.
support that, but I'm out on 5 acres. I used to grew up in the city in South Denver, and now I'm out a little bit in a town called Parker.
My aunt lives in Littleton,
Nice.
and I know that, you can go into a building at 8 in the morning and it's 60 degrees and you can come out of the building and there's a blizzard going on.
100%. Yeah.
That's crazy. So Dan, our topic today is transitions, but tell us a little bit about your professional journey.
Yeah, I've been in the dental industry now for probably a little over 25 years. My initial introduction to the business was I had an IT business. We tried to service computers for every business out there, be an expert for everybody. And then I had the blessing of sitting in a Denver or Colorado Dental Association conference, and we sat down and we started talking about how the move from those dark rooms to digital imaging was going to happen. And I
Oh my
realized
goodness.
that this was time for me to be a specialist. So at that time, I split from my partner and started a IT company called Cornerstone Dental Solutions, and here in Colorado initially. And then we grew that through the Rocky Mountain region. So I did that for a little over 14 years. At that point, I got a little tired of those phone calls at 9 o'clock at night that a server went down and how I was going to get people out to take care of a dental
You mean
office.
you didn't enjoy just leaving your phone on 24/7 and getting
No,
calls about
no,
serve no.
no, no, that's scramble, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
So at that point, I had the opportunity to sell my business to my employees. And so I've had that opportunity now 3 times of selling a business over the years, and started and joined a real estate company called Car Healthcare Realty as a
Sure.
COO. And we initially were in Colorado, and then I came on board and we grew that to reps across the entire country. And that was a great experience and got great people. Then sold my portion of the business and retired. And after 6 months, my wife said, "You know what? You really need to do something. Our marriage of 30 years works really good if you're busy."
Dan, here's how this works. She married you for better or for worse, but not for lunch. That's how this
Yeah, there
works.
we go. I like that. I like
When
that.
I came home, I guess it's 6 years ago from the pandemic. In fact, when the pandemic hit, she says to me, she says, "Are you coming home to work?" I said, "I'm not planning on it." And then the next day she says, "You're coming home to work." And I don't know if she realized how that worked, but, our marriage is 40 years, 41 in May, and she hasn't given up yet, and I've been working from home since, so I get it.
Yeah, you get it. You get it. And then, yeah, I was fortunate enough to join Henry Schein. At that time, I thought I'd just do some transitions here in Colorado and be done with that leadership and ownership piece of my life. And eventually, they kind of brought me back in and wanted me to be involved more on the sales and leadership team. And so now, yeah, I have the privilege of kind of working with our team here across the country. We have about 50 sales reps across the country, all in local markets that are taking care of our customers. Obviously, sales, we represent only our sellers in any buyers in our transactions. Primarily, it's doctor to doctor sales, which follows our trends with our dental team. So, yeah, have a great opportunity. I've wore a few different hats in the dental industry, and all of them have been great.
Well, with that, there's nobody I know who's more qualified to talk about what's going on in the transitions market, which is always changing. It changes with interest rates, it changes with the economy, it changes with this and that. So let's start off. Give us kind of an overview. And again, this is a nationwide podcast, so we got
Yeah.
people listening in all 50 states. What's going on? Single dentist sale to single dentist sale. What's the market looking like today?
Yeah, it's still a very strong business on the tail end of the baby boomers, but the baby boomers are still very interested of transitioning their business. They've done a great job of growing their practices, but they're ready to take that next step. I think our numbers, we estimate, another, 28,000 docs in the next just 2 to 3 years are going to be selling their practices. So there's
Yeah.
still a lot of folks out there that are selling. And we believe, not just because we're the transition company, that they need representation. They not only need a broker like ours, but like you are, delivering that CPA and guidance, direction, for them. They need key lenders like Bank of America. We work with them a ton. You mentioned them earlier. I've been working with them back into my IT days of startups and those things, and they deliver great solutions for folks in the transition side. So putting an A team around them is part of our job too as brokers, to make sure the seller is in good spot and those deals are still out there. The lending is still being done at 100%. I think B of A even's doing more than 100% now, 115% of gross, and
I've
it's
seen them
amazing.
do a couple of over 100%
Uh,
deals, and now obviously those deals have to be pristine,
right.
as you
Right.
and I both know, and we're
Yep.
gonna talk about banks here in a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I've always used a statistic, Dan, that 10 to 15% of practices turn over every year. So if you're saying,
Yeah.
28,000, there's 200,000 dentists in the country, but not all of them own practices. So, those numbers seem pretty reasonable to me. So, all right, so let's say we're talking, to the sellers listening to this podcast, right? And I would love to get into their brains and figure out, how do they decide that they're going to retire? And
Right.
I'm assuming a lot of times, one doctor who said to me, Art, one day I'm going to call you and tell you I'm ready to pop. And he did. He called me and says, I'm ready to pop. And so let's say I got a doctor, Dan's couple, 2, 3 years out from retirement. What are the first couple of steps that they should be taking to get ready to do this? I mean, you don't just wake up on a Monday and then put your practice out for sale on a Tuesday. It doesn't work that way. So
Right.
talk about what doctors should be doing if they're, thinking about retirement.
Yeah, that's a great point, Art, and I'm sure you've seen this as well. I mean, we get excited when somebody says they're 3 years out, quite frankly, or 5 years out, because we love to take care of folks that want to move right away on a practice sale. We can do that, and we do that all the time. But those who have more time, we now can dig into that practice and make sure it's really ready to sell. We want to make sure that we can get the sales opportunities, that there's no roadblocks that are going to hurt us to transition this practice, right? So, when they're further out in their time frame, we love that, because we kind of feel like that first step is we want to do a deep dive on the practice, right? And we feel the best way we do that is practice valuation. We take it very seriously. We have a team of 7 people, certified valuation folks that are on our team that do the valuations. And as you've seen many times, the worst thing can happen is if they get a price on this practice and it's too high, right? Because it's a broker thinks, hey, if I give them a bigger number, they're going to go with me and I'm going to be able to sell this. And what ends up happening is good buyers miss the opportunity because it's priced too high, right? The lenders look at it and caution their customers on the fact that, hey, we're not going to be able to lend 100% on this. You're going to need to bring money to this table, and those deals don't happen. Or if a valuation is inaccurate on the other end, we're leaving money on the table, right? It's too low of a price, and maybe somebody just wants to try to sell it quickly, but now this doctor has lost, revenues that you should have had. So we feel like a practice valuation that's accurate. It's a lot of data if you're going to get accuracy, and you would know that, Art, as a CPA. We don't just go with tax returns for 3 years. We take a deep
Oh,
dive
no.
into all their practice management software, knowing exactly what they do, right? The practice and how it's built, and overhead costs. I mean, we have $2 million practices that somebody will tell a doctor, hey, you should get about 85% for that in your market. And then I'm looking at it and I'm saying, well, doctor, if your practice has been managed so well and you only have 50% overhead, and that other $1 million practice has 70% overhead. Those aren't the same price. You know,
Right. No,
that,
no.
we've got to do a deep dive on the practice evaluation so that we can understand that. And then if a person wants to make changes over the next 3 to 4 years so that we maximize the sale and maybe make some of those adjustments, they still have time, and we have services with our dental team that helps them dig into AR and how to handle AR. And we have services that helps them, build a better hygiene, program. And if they need to bring in an associate those last few years, what that would look like. So, that at least gives us the time to prepare well to do that. So,
Couple things I want to comment on. Number
yeah,
one, doctors. And again, remember that the brokers in most states, now in California, you can be a dual agent, but I'd cut my left arm off before I'd be a dual agent to represent buyer and a seller, and this is just too much of a conflict of interest. But remember that the brokers, like Dan, is going to represent the seller. And if they're feeding you a line as, oh, we can get you I mean, I've heard dentists come and say, well, this broker said he can get me 150. I had one 150%. I had one that was actually 180%. And I said, no,
right.
it doesn't work that way. So, it's important, doctors, that you understand that buyers are looking, and we're going to talk next about what buyers are looking for. But one of the things they're looking for, Dan, is they're looking for practices that have upward trends. I mean,
Mhm.
banks don't like, Bank of America
Yeah.
doesn't, they've told me they'll finance, but it's harder if I got a practice that's dropping 5 or 10% a year for the
Yeah.
last 5 years. And there's a story. So let's talk about buyers here. Okay. What are the top things that you're seeing? Because you're working with buyers every single day,
Right.
thousands of them.
Right.
What are buyers looking for? Now, sellers, listen to this. What are buyers looking for when they're looking for a practice?
Yeah, yeah, I think a lot of different things, right? I mean, the obvious would be, hey, what is the cash flow of this practice, right?
Yeah,
They're looking at
that's big.
how much they can make. They know what they've got in their loan payment that they're repaying already for school. They know some of
Right.
them have already bought houses or car payments or $1,000. They have to figure out how can this cash flow for me to build. Obviously, that needs to play into our lenders, right? Because they need to identify, okay, what are we going to lend on? Because they're not just lending on the practice, they are lending on, on the individual, right? And their liquidity and those things. But they're also looking at this practitioner saying, okay, can he handle this workload of the practice,
Right.
right? We might have a
Right. That's a big deal.
Right.
That's
We
a
might
big deal.
we might have a practice that, is doing 30% specialty work and that doctor coming in is not capable of doing that.
Right.
That's
Right.
probably not the right practice for them. They're not going to maximize as a seller to sell to that person because they're not going to be able to do it and the bank probably won't lend on it, to the degree they need. So those are, from a buyer's perspective, I think they're looking for ideally an urban practice, right? We have so many great rural practices that are cash flowing like crazy and that buyers don't want to be there, right? That's not the
And
place
I'm
they
hearing
want to be.
that too, Dan. I'm hearing that too. I'm hearing, California. I wanna be in San Francisco. I wanna
Yeah,
be in San Jose. I wanna be in
yeah,
Los Angeles. I don't wanna be in this small town. Well, doctor, you could have a 50%
yeah,
overhead in a
yeah.
wonderful town of 25,000 people. I don't want
I
that.
know,
So
I know.
that means that rural practices are gonna probably take, and this is a generalization, right? But they're probably gonna take longer to sell than a really
100%.
good practice in a big metropolitan area that's a good practice, right?
100%, and probably have to reduce the price at some point, right? Than you would do if you move that into an urban area. But a lot of great opportunities. Wish more buyers. We're looking for buyers that grew up in rural areas to try to
Sure.
market those practices to because they realize, those are great communities to bring their family into and to do business. But it's not a big buyer pool. We have a buyer pool currently of over 36,000 buyers because we are nationwide and we have connections into all the dental offices. So that buyer pool is a lot. And a lot of our
Right.
buyers do move from one state to another. They're looking for something different, but that's a big thing that they're looking for. They're looking for, at least 4 ops. They ideally like to maybe have 5 to get expand into so that they know they can grow with the practice. Usually that's a younger doc and they're wanting some technology, I try to level that expectation a little bit because a practice that has 20-year-old equipment is still extremely valuable based on the cash flow. And it isn't just because they had a new CAD cam that you should be buying a practice, or offering, that much more for them. So,
I wanna make a point, Dan, about you said 4 ops. So I will tell you, we had a couple of CPA clients who put their practices on the market, and they had 3 ops.
yeah.
We found, and this was very surprising to me,
Yep.
we found that a 3-op practice is, I'm not gonna say it's impossible to sell, but it's really, really hard because
Right.
doctors, number 1, you're not gonna work out a 1 operatory.
Right.
You're gonna work out a 2. And that leaves you the ability to have 4 to 5 days of hygiene.
Yeah.
Well, that's not gonna get you much over $1,000,000 of production if you want a bigger practice and you've got student loan debt, all this stuff. So if you have, Dan, if they have a 3-op practice and, they're looking at transition somewhere down the road, I mean, if they're a year or 2 away, there's not much we can do. But if they're 5 or 10 years away or longer, maybe consider moving into a bigger
Mhm.
space so that down the road the practice is more saleable. Have you seen
Mhm.
that?
Yeah, yeah, and sometimes we're able to identify space in the building sometimes, right? Doctor had a
Right.
consult room or something else too, or we talk to the landlord and there's a space available, so we may, get that first right of refusal in place. So now we have some flexibility. So yeah, there's some things that we definitely can look at to try to help that situation. But you're exactly right, Art. It's hard for a 3-op office, to be sold now because they're all about looking for growth as a
Yeah.
new doctor, so.
Well, you mentioned a little earlier valuation and you have CVAs, and I have a lot of respect for CVAs. I am not a CVA, but I know many of them. So if you have CVAs, that means they know how
Yeah.
to value a practice. Give us kind of a 35,000 foot overview of kind of how do you value the practice? How do you come up with the number of what you're going to recommend that a seller list their practice for?
Yeah, like I said, a lot of detail. Some of that starts with the financial part of it, but obviously doesn't end with it. We want at least 3 years of tax returns, so sometimes we struggle sometimes if a doc just bought the practice a year and a half ago, now he wants to sell it right away, of having some of that history. You can work around some of those things, but having 3 years gives the bank some confidence, in making some decisions and also gives a better picture, of the health of the practice. We're going to take a look at the location. That's a big part of it. And not only the location so that we know it's in a good location, but, what are the other areas of the building? I was in real estate, buyer side real estate for a long time. And if the parking is not great in a facility, it can be a major issue that some people don't always consider. If they don't have a strong lease in place, if that lease only has a year or they're on month by month lease.
Oh, we're going to talk about leases here in a minute, I'll tell you.
Yeah, it's a huge issue.
Ugh, my blood pressure is going up when you said lease and landlord, but we'll get to that in a minute. Keep going.
Yep, yep, that's a world I lived in for some time, right? And, when they look at the opportunities, the one thing I always say from a buyer side is, let's make sure you are pre-approved. We take a lot of pride and responsibility when we have a seller commit to us because it is a big commitment, right? That they're committing to us to sell this practice to their baby that they've, had for 25 years. And one of the things is we're going to make sure that we don't just let everybody have access to your practice information. We're not going to put people in your practice that aren't qualified to actually get a loan and to be able to practice, in this practice. We want to qualify our buyers. And so part of that is what buyers should be doing too is, find your B of A, representative and get pre-qualified and be able to know what you have to work with your budget around a practice and what are the criteria. And maybe again, have that deep dive on your personal finances so you know what you're capable, of doing and what you can't do. And the other piece is I always say to buyers is, tell us where you want to be. Where's your location? And I have buyers all the time say, I just want to go wherever it's successful. You just tell me, and wherever I'm going to make the most money, and the
The
problem with
middle of the Pacific Ocean. No,
yeah,
just kidding.
yeah, yeah. And it's not realistic, right? I mean, the reality is, they don't want to be and shouldn't be traveling an hour and a half both ways from your practice to your home. You want to be in a community because you're raising young kids and you care about the school system. Well, then that doesn't mean you want to be anywhere. There's some criteria. So I think we try really hard on both the seller and the buyer side to say, get realistic about expectations and get honed in on it, because this is a big deal. This transition is huge in your future. Has to do more than just where am I going to make the most money. It's got to be looked at a lot of pieces.
Absolutely. And, buyers, one of the reasons that you want to get pre-qualified, you go to your B of A rep, local rep, and you say, hey, listen, I want to see where you're at. They're going to say, well, you know what? You have a late payment on your house payment. That's the kiss of death, by the way. That is the absolute kiss of death. So the other thing I like to talk about, Dan, is I always get the question from buyers, should I buy the house first or should I buy the practice first?
Yeah.
Well, here's the deal, doctors. If you buy the house first, okay, then and you want to live in the community you work, which both Dan and I think, Dan, you agree, we really think that's a
Mhm.
good idea, then you're going to be very limited to the number of practices that you can go after. But if you buy the practice in the area that you want to live, finding a house in that area is gonna be a lot easier. So,
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
that's always what we're looking at. So, what are some of the biggest mistakes, Dan, that you see sellers making in this process?
Yeah, I would say and we talked about it a little bit earlier. One of them is the idea that, they have that number in their head. They're 60 years old, they want to retire at 65, and now they're making that plan. And what they decide to do is, you know what, I'm going to work 5 more years, but I don't want to work this doggone hard. I think I want to drop down to 3.5 days a week, maybe 3 days a week. I'm okay sending more of my specialty stuff out. I used to do it myself, right? And that's the direction I'll go. And as you mentioned earlier, that's a major problem, right? Is now we have this downward trend, and the banks are basically saying, "I see this downward trend, but I don't know where it's going to end. If is it really going to end when this new buyer comes in place and tries to grow, or is it going to continue?" So, sellers end up selling their practices for much less. In these cases, I've had some that, we sold it 3 years. If we had have sold it 3 years beforehand, they could have made double the money on the practice. We would
Yeah.
have sold it within 3 months, and he probably would have made more money than he stayed on, in this less capacity down the road. So that's a big key is thinking about that, trying to at least at a minimum stay at the same volume or increase at the end. And some say, hey, that's not how I want to do my last few years. Okay, well, there's other options. Maybe you're bringing in an associate a day a week or 2 days a week, right? You keep your volume up, and you may not take as much home, but that's fine. You're not impacting the practice itself in the value part of that practice.
And the other thing, Dan, that I wanna talk to you a little bit about is if we can get that practice, let's say it's doing 8 or 900,000. Well, I've run the numbers 42 ways to Sunday. And you need revenues, doctors, in your practice if you want to sell and work back. My minimum number is 1.3 million. In other
Mhm.
words, that gives you doctors enough money to sell your practice, and the buyer's got to pay number one, they've got to pay their personal expenses
Right,
and their taxes. Number two, they've got to pay the loan payment to the bank. And number three, they've got to pay you as an associate a couple days a week.
right.
So one thing you might consider, and I love your opinion on this, Dan, would be you're right at that precipice of a million one, million two. Work with a consultant, get that practice revenues up. Maybe they can get you to work smarter and not harder.
Mhm.
So maybe by the time you get to talking to Dan and his team, maybe you got 1.5 million, 1.8 million. Number one, the value is gonna be higher
Right,
because it's based on gross, and your net's gonna be higher
right.
because as you grow your practice, Dan, right, the incremental profit is significantly higher.
Mhm.
You don't have additional rent, you don't have additional professional fees, you don't have additional office expense really.
Right,
So you're gonna have additional profit, and there's gonna be enough work for you to work back, give up the management right? I mean,
right.
you talk to buyers and you talk to sellers about that, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And then and that kind of lends itself to the DSO discussion. So I'll just mention my perspective on that too, right? same scenario where that doc says, "Hey, I just want to work for 5 more years, but I've heard best thing for me to do is sell that DSO, and then I'll work back for him or them, and I'll do that 5 years, and I'll cash out on my practice the way it is because it's at a high value today." And I would just say that we do transactions with DSOs as well. They're small percentages of our practice, but we definitely do those. And there's some good DSOs out there. I'm not telling you they're all bad and people haven't had good experiences, but I can tell you, and I'm a little bit biased being a business owner majority of my life, that I wouldn't want somebody to tell me how to practice or to how I was going to do business those last 5 years, of my business. So I think some folks that have gone through this process have kind of realized that feels a lot different. I don't own my practice anymore. I lost all those write-offs that I had as an owner, and now I'm working for 30%, of my production, and I'm going to have to do it for 5 years to get that extra money at the end of the
Maybe,
deal. That
maybe,
right. Even
maybe.
if they could do it, right? Because they may have never even done it yet. That's
Right.
all been done on a promise that they're going to get there. And I just would tell folks to do your due diligence. If you're going to deal with a DSO, you're committing those last, important 5 years of your life. Make sure you understand what that looks like. Make sure you're not just talking to referrals who are doctors that are already in the group and benefit from selling you to be in the group.
Right.
Be focused on the right thing. I mean, the one thing I love to do, and as a team, kind of has always been my philosophy. My dad was an entrepreneur, and he always taught me, just take care of people, do business right, and you'll have more business than you ever need. And so one of the things that I instilled with our team is that one of the questions I always want us to ask our sellers before you get started at all, say, what would be, if you could paint a perfect picture of your transition, doctor, what would you want that to be?
Right.
Do you want to stay on for 5 years? Do you want to sell it to an individual doc? Ask some questions so they have a chance. They've earned the right to sell their practice to who they want to and how they want that transition to go. Make sure you understand that. So you're not just trying to shove them to a DSO or look for the highest price or do something that isn't really what their objective is. And I think that's something that's gotten lost in our industry a little bit on the transition side, is that we have to allow them to be a key role in that. And we want to match what they've said to us to buyers that are coming in so that we can create a great situation. I mean, I love it when I get the testimonial back from one of our reps, and they not only had a great testimonial from the seller who we represented, but also the buyer, because we created a transition that everybody won and it was positive.
Absolutely. And the transition is important. The seller needs to know what they want to do. One thing I do want to encourage sellers to be thinking about, Dan, is don't wait till the last minute to make this decision. I
Mm,
had a client who called me up and said, Art, my shoulder, I haven't told you this, but my shoulder has been hurting me for about 3 years, but I'm to the point where I literally don't think I'll be able to pick up a handpiece for much
mm,
more than a week or two.
mm,
Doctors, if you're having physical issues, if you're having issues of you're just not into this anymore, you want to move on to something else, don't wait.
yeah.
Because if you wait, your valuation is going to go down because your practice is going to go down. And especially if you have physical issues. I got someone,
Mhm,
I work with who is, he keeps telling me, well, I have this issue. I have this issue. And I go, well, do you want to sell? Well, I want to hang on a little longer. I want to see if and I go, well, you're taking a big risk because if you wake up one day and you can't do this anymore, that's not good. Hey, take a second, Dan, and tell us a little bit about what you guys do at Henry Schein Dental Practice Transitions. And I want you to give out your contact information. And, this is both for buyers and sellers. And again, those of you who are long-term listeners of this podcast know that I only bring on, the top people in the industry who have nothing but your best interest at heart. And, Henry Schein is about as reputable a company as you're going to find out there. There's no question in my mind about that. I've known the folks from Shine for the 41 years I've been in dentistry. And so talk a little bit about what you do and how they could connect with you.
Yeah, obviously, our primary focus is to help doctors with their transition. So it could be, again, as we just mentioned, a long-term plan that we want to sit down and have a transition plan for them, whether that's, 3, 5 years, or even beyond that. Again, put the right team around them to help them have success in avoiding any kind of issues that may be hard to sell the practice and maximizing the sale, of the practice. So we start with that. Again, the valuations we do are very important. We just mentioned, people's physical, issues of being able to practice. We think it's important for them to get the valuation, not only to get the idea of where we're headed now, but also if you had an emergency or something happened to you physically, you were ready to put this practice up for sale and move as quick as possible. You've seen it, Art, where if someone passes away,
Oh,
staff
that's
is
yeah.
looking at moving to somebody else. There's no plan to have anybody in the practice to be, doing some of the work to keep the practice going. And within 60, 90 days, there's no practice to sell anymore.
That's very true. Very, very true.
Some folks, this is their whole money that is gonna be part of the retirement for their family, and I want to protect that. So we recommend not only evaluation, but also an emergency exit plan, so that it's laid out for them to be able to we can move quickly on the practice sale, and there's no hindrances based on, family. They should be mourning and supporting each other during something this time. They shouldn't be digging into a practice and have to worry about a practice that has to be sold, So that's another area that we do and do at no charge for our doctors because we just feel that that's an important piece of this as well. And so, yeah, we do the transitions and, our my information, I'd love you to reach out to me. I love to connect with people. That's why I'm still working and doing what I'm doing is I love to support. So my name again is Dan Van Eps and my email address is dan.vaneps BANEPS at henryschein.com. My cell number is 303-906-6408. And the website that you probably want to go to see practices that we have for sale and all the details about our services is under Dental Practice Transitions, henryschein.com.
Perfect. Okay. So if you have any questions, you can certainly reach out to Dan. Dan is one of the nicest humans I know, and he will be happy to answer your questions. All right. Let's talk about my favorite subject. Now, this is again where the blood pressure goes up. Landlords. Dan, you and I both know that brokers can generally control the narrative. They can control, when I say control, meaning they can manage the buyer and the seller.
Mhm.
They know all the local reps that you have. They know all the local bankers, the B of A guys and all this stuff, right? They know everybody. They know the CPAs. They know the consultants. They know what's going to happen there. What we don't know is what's going to happen with the landlord. So talk about, dealing with landlord. And I want to talk a little bit about what a doctor 2 or 3 or 4 years out should do if they don't own their real estate. If they
Mhm.
do, that's great
Mhm.
because then we control the landlord
Right.
too, right? But
Right.
talk about dealing with landlords and give our sellers some tips and our buyers some tips. I mean, again, you were on the buyer side with
Right.
Carr,
Right.
so you have as good of a perspective on this as anybody.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, unfortunately, it can be a deal killer for you as a seller if it hasn't been addressed and it isn't put in the right spot as you move ahead. So, like Art said, if you're leasing, it's critical in this whole process. Not only I would do an evaluation, but have that lease be evaluated and assessed so you know exactly where the lease are. And in most cases, the banks want to have a minimum of 5 years on the lease available. So if you're going to
That is
take an
correct.
assignment over on a lease, you want that 5 years minimum. Some banks even require 10 years. So make sure the banks you're talking to, you understand how much term you need to have on the lease as part of this. And then the ability for that lease to be assignable. So if you're a seller and you're on the guarantor as the doctor and that lease is not assignable, we've got deals that have died or a doctor who's a seller, unfortunately, has sold his practice, but he's still on as a guarantor on a lease for the buyer for 3 years because it was the only way he could sell his practice was to stay on as a guarantor because the landlord wasn't going to let him out. And the landlord said, "Hey, I know who's got money and who I can keep as a guarantor. I'm not going to give it to the buyer. You've signed as a guarantor." So those leases, like I said, are critical to have them evaluated much earlier than when you're going to sell the practice because that's when you have the leverage to make some changes and identify it. You have to identify if the rental rate that you're spending is within market, right? So, is it in line so that the lenders can lend on the deal, especially if maybe you're going to be buying from a doctor who wants to stay on as the landlord. I owned all my real
Right.
estate for all my businesses, and I knew that I don't think the IRS is listening to our podcast today, right, Art? But
No,
um,
every time I give a lecture, I always say, "Is there anybody in the audience from the IRS?" Because I just kinda put my arms out like this and say, "Come and take me away." No,
but
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 but,
but in this case, when you look at that, I mean, I was obviously charging myself a lot more money per month than
right,
probably I would normally do, and saving
correct.
myself some money in the process. But when I go as a doctor then to sell my practice, and if I want to stay on as a landlord, we're probably going to have to realize that there's going to have to be maybe some adjustments to that lease. We're not maybe going to be able to charge what I charge myself because it's way over market value, and again, won't be able to be handled by a landlord that buyer's not going to be able to buy. And again, it could kill a deal. So even as a seller on that side of a landlord, you have to realize you have to prepare well too, so you can give a good lease and be in a good position.
This episode is brought to you by Bank of America Practice Solutions. If you are thinking about starting or growing your dental practice, we would love to help you take the next step. Email us at dg.connect@bofa.com, and we will send you a free business plan template that is perfect for starting the conversation about your future practice. Bank of America Practice Solutions has the expertise, the resources, and the support for your success. Don't wait. Email dg.connect@bofa.com today. Hey, it's Art Wiederman here. You know I don't recommend products lightly. I only share solutions that can genuinely impact your practice's clinical outcomes and bottom line. That's why I really want to tell you about Interview. They've developed an FDA-cleared technology that measures internal tooth mobility, something that traditional methods just can't detect early enough. Here's what that means for your practice. You can identify cracks and loose restorations before they become emergencies. That means better treatment planning, fewer surprises for your patients, and more predictable case acceptance. Interview integrates right into your existing workflow. No complicated processes, just clever diagnostic information when you need it. If you've been looking for a way to elevate your diagnostic capabilities and strengthen patient trust, book a demo at interview.ai. That's INNERVIEW.ai. Mention my name and you'll get $250 off. That's Interview AI. INNERVIEW.ai. I've got one I'm dealing with where the seller owns the building, and he comes to me and he says, Art, I need this amount of money to pay my bill. I go, well, I get it, but that's not the buyer's problem. The buyer's going to come back and say, you need to charge me what fair rent is. And then that becomes an issue. I will tell you, Dan, and I've said this on this podcast many times, and I'm not going to get sued because I'm not mentioning any names. Landlords are evil human beings, period. End of discussion. For the most part, we have
Yeah.
some nice ones, but they are out for one thing and one thing only: get as much rent as possible
Mhm,
out of their tenants.
mhm,
And so, doctors, one of the suggestions that I make is before you even, you certainly give Dan a call, but before you even sign a listing agreement,
mm,
okay? Go to a dental attorney, have them review your lease, see if there's any landmines.
mhm,
And then you can go to the landlord and say, hey, Joe, I know our thing's coming up, but I had my attorney looking at a lot of my personal legal matters. And one of the things he's doing is looking at my office lease. And I was just wondering if we could, make some changes to this lease. Like, here's an example. And again, having been with Carr, you deal with this all the time. So, doctors, if you have an option, okay, and maybe you have 2 years on the lease or a year on the lease, and you go, well, wait a minute, I've got 2 5-year options, so I'm good. Well, wait a minute, is that option personal to you, or can that option be taken over by anybody, right, Dan?
mhm.
If that option is personal to you, it cannot be assigned. So guess what, doctor? You've got 1 year left on your lease, and the landlord, I'm not going to use bad words here, but the landlord's kind of got you in a bad position, right?
Yeah,
So
percent.
these are the things that we have to kind of deal with. Okay. So, all right, let's get back into talking to buyers here because buyers are very important.
Yeah.
So a buyer comes, graduates dental school. I always tell them work in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 practices to kind of get a feel for what kind of a practice do you want to have.
Mhm.
And they wake up one day like the seller does, ready to sell, and the buyer says, I'm ready. Okay, I'm ready to buy. I want to be a business owner. Okay. We talked about what the seller should be doing. What should a buyer be doing to be, before they start looking at buying? What are the steps they should be doing to get their house in order?
Yeah, I mentioned before the pre-qualification obviously is critical, right? So if they've done that, they're in a good space to start looking for practices. Again, they've identified maybe the location that they want to be in, right? So they can hone in on something that really is realistic. They need to look at, if they're going to buy a practice out of state, how do I deal with the licensing and credentialing, right, for that
Can
new
be a problem.
practice because it can delay. And sometimes, again, you may not be able to do the transaction because the seller needs to move faster than what you can do if you're actually got to still sell a house or I still got to sell a practice before I move on. Be aware of those things that could delay the process. But I have that a lot with even just the accreditation, that gets delayed. And again, technically, a doctor taking over that practice needs to be, credited to all those insurances and be able to handle it. So I also even tell doctors if they are buying a practice that has, a Delta Premier, insurance, are you in an area that can accept that, right? Or has that only been assigned to that doctor? They're not allowing any other doctors in that area. So when you buy that practice, you're not going to get, a Delta Premier status. You're going to have to change that. And that you should be looking at that as a buyer, right? Realizing
Yeah.
that's a different value. If I'm looking at a practice that I didn't uncover that is 30% Medicaid, do you want to take Medicaid? Are you willing to do those procedures, or are you going to be somebody that's going to have to offer a smaller amount based on that Medicaid, or is that not the practice for you? Being able to look at all those areas. And like I mentioned before, if you got that great team, that A team around you that's supporting you, it's that attorney, it's that CPA, it's maybe a consultant, a buyer consultant. We love the idea sometimes when a buyer consultant is in place, we're not threatened at all by that. We want that buyer to have great counsel, to make a great decision. And then that's the way we know, the reputation of what we're doing has been done the right way.
Let's talk. You teed me up for my next
Okay.
topic, which is going to be the buyer's due diligence. The
Yeah.
buyer, and remember, doctors, and Dan, please agree or disagree. You're allowed to disagree with the host only once. Twice we don't allow, but once you can disagree. Doctors, it is buyer beware out there. You're going to sign a contract that says, under the section that's called representations and warranties, that you have had access to all of the accounting records
Mhm.
and all of the management records and all of the equipment, and you have kicked the tires, and that it is your responsibility. Because, I mean, how many times do we hear a buyer who runs a practice and go, oh, well, they misrepresent? No, no,
Yeah.
no. They didn't misrepresent it. You didn't do your due diligence. You didn't hire the professional. So let's talk about financial and management due diligence. What are you, again, I know you don't represent the buyers, but
Mhm.
we certainly talk to the buyers about that, right?
Right. 100%. And, I'm such a big believer is everybody should have dental specific
Yes.
advisors, right? So if I want my uncle who is a CPA and does general business to, look at the financials for me and do my due diligence, I'm strongly recommending, that they don't do that, right? That they're working with somebody who has the dental expertise to do that. The attorneys, the same thing, their due diligence, make sure it's a, dental specific attorney. Just what we talked about leases, make sure it's a dental specific, broker that can review a lease for you if your attorney can't do it for you. So having that right team around you for due diligence is extremely important because they're looking at the right things for you, things that you wouldn't necessarily know on your own. Don't do your due diligence. In my opinion, don't do it alone. Don't just show up at a place and say, I'm going to do a chart audit and spend, 20 minutes looking at some charts and maybe not really knowing what I should be looking for as a doctor. Make sure you have the right folks around you to go through the process. But yeah, you should be able to identify identify everything from the financial side. And from my perspective, as doctors, your buyers, this is the first time you've ever done it. Don't rely on your own competency in any of these areas. Get the people around you to support you. That's what I would highlight, Art.
I'll put a plug into our Academy of Dental CPAs, and they do due diligence. We talk about it at our meetings. As guys, if you're looking, it's www.adcpa.org. They can help you with your due diligence. The other thing is when so we talked about the team. So we need an accountant, we need a dental management consultant. And again, I don't know how you guys work. If a buyer comes to you and says, gee, I really want to work with dental specific people, are you, under your agreements, do you recommend some of that, give them a list of people in the area? Do you do that or do you not?
Yeah, we try, we're not giving them one name for everything. It's important, I think, that they interview multiple people in the market
Right.
and make that
Of course.
decision. But yeah, I mean, as you know, Art, if we're not putting a good team around them, these deals unfortunately don't get done sometimes, right? And we want them to do their own due diligence and make sure they flush those folks out and make sure they're the right fit. Sometimes it's a personality part too, not just a competency part, right? So that buyers should be working through with the people that they really make that connection. But yeah, we feel like part of our role, if they have somebody that they don't have for their team, that we know somebody that's local to the market that can do a good job. I mean, I've had some where they've asked for an attorney, and that attorney has been a attorney that's doing deals on the East Coast, and we're doing a West Coast deal, and I get really nervous, right? Because we know that
Yeah.
they're going to pay a
Oh,
lot
yeah.
more money, and there's going to be a lot more redlining on that deal because the doctor, again, this attorney just doesn't know dental, and they don't know the state as much, what they're dealing with. So yeah, those recommendations
If
are
we can have two dental CPAs,
right.
if we can have two dental attorneys, because the dental attorneys, the great thing about the dental attorneys that I've learned, Dan, is that if they do a lot of deals with each other
Right.
and they know each other's documents and they
Right.
know what they want. I've had dental attorneys say, oh, I'm so glad that I'm dealing with attorney X over here because I know his or her document. I know what they're looking
Right.
for. I know what I'll accept. I know what I won't accept.
Right.
And so that's why it's so important to do that. We need the accountant. We need the attorney for the buyer. We need a consultant for the buyer. The bank is going to be another like a
Mhm.
consultant because if
Right.
B of A isn't going to make the loan, and I always joke with the guys from B of A. It's like, okay, so now did you bring your briefcase of money today, right? And so if they're not going to make the loan, that doesn't mean that the practice isn't worth what it's worth. It just means that they're going to come to you, buyer, and they're going to say, this is why.
Mhm.
And then, so those are the things that we have to talk about. So we talked about the team. Let's talk about, as we come to the end of our discussion today, Dan, let's talk about some of the warning signs that buyers should look at. Now, I know that every practice, Henry Schein practice transitions list has at least a 55-60% profit. Every one. It's a requirement, right?
I
That
wish.
was sarcasm,
I
folks.
wish.
I would, yeah. Don't you and I wish it would. You and I would have more hair of a different color, right?
Right.
And so that basically. And by the way, we only interview people on this show who have less hair than the
There
host.
you go. See,
So
I
this
took
is
care
my
of that this
second
morning.
consecutive one with that. So no offense, Dan. I'm sorry, but anyway. So the warning signs of what we're talking about here is, I know that there are some practice sometimes that you list. You go, well, seller, I think we can do this, but
Mhm.
you may not be happy with the price or whatever. So for a buyer, what are some warning signs that they should look at in a practice that say, I don't know.
Yeah, and some of them you may be even looking at without a broker support, right? So, we have plenty of
Right.
people that are trying to do this on their own. That's a whole podcast in itself that we won't go through, but but I
I
would
could do a podcast every day on all the topics that I
right,
can't spend
right,
time
right.
talking on. Yeah.
But I would say as a buyer, certain areas, right? When you're meeting with a seller, it's not them just interviewing you, you're interviewing them too. Yeah, I think you should be getting a feel for that doctor, how he practices, and understanding how long has his staff been in place. Is there just massive turnover all the time? Is it always new, or is there some steady staff in place? How are they dealing with the marketing? Is it a lot of word of mouth? Are they adding a lot of new patients every month? And is it just because of this very expensive marketing, or is it self-generating itself? It'll tell you some health about that practice as you interview a doctor and get an understanding of who they are, because they will attract certain patients that are similar to that doctor. And if you have a different philosophy of dentistry and those things, how is that going to impact the practice? How is it going to impact the staff? If somebody has just done a really poor job of their finances, right? If you've got some of your folks that are trying to do due diligence and they're looking at tax returns going, wait a minute, what is this? And where did those add backs come back? And where is that? If there's questions on that, that's a red flag to me. I go deep then on the finances and the tax returns and P&Ls to make sure they're clean and you know exactly if they did add backs, what those were, if you're going to be paying for it as part of your purchase price, where that was. Yeah, those are just a few
Yeah.
of the top ones that hit me for now.
That's great. Now I'm going to talk to my sellers here. Okay. Now remember, you're talking to a 41-year dental CPA. And again, we asked if there's any IRS agents looking at it. My big joke. And again, if there is anybody from the IRS, this is sarcasm. This is humor. This is not true. I always joke about that all tax returns are quoted approximately, just like my golf score, right? But no, we don't do that. I was very serious. As a dental CPA, I actually fired. I think it was five of my clients I fired over my 41 years because they were just not doing what they should be doing. That's again another podcast. But so doctors, let's think about it this way. If you have been, let's use the word aggressive in taking tax deductions over the past 30, 35, 40 years, you have won the war. You have increased your retirement annuity by God knows what number. Banks are going to be looking, buyers are going to be looking at, consultants are going to be looking at the last 2 or 3 years of your numbers. So in the last 2 or 3 years, you might consider losing some of the battles because, Dan, here's an interesting point. The banks, when they come up with how much they're going to lend, okay, which a lot of times tells the buyer, well, if they're not going to lend, why should I buy the practice? Okay. What a bank is going to lend does not dictate what the practice is worth, right? It dictates what the bank under their lending rules will lend. So the bank will allow certain add backs. They'll allow depreciation. They'll allow interest. They'll allow car. They'll allow the owners, generally the owner's portion of the retirement. I've never understood why they don't allow the whole thing, but that's another conversation for another day. Okay. But what they won't allow as an add back is all the trips to the market, all the personal vacations, they won't, and they will lend based on that. And the seller's going to say, wait, there's all this stuff in here, and you got this is all profit to you. Well, that's an issue. You run into that, right, Dan?
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, you definitely need to understand what qualifies as that add back and not, right? And like I said before, sometimes if that's taken and done by a evaluation team or somebody else that doesn't have that competency level, now all of a sudden you're overpaying for a practice. I've seen situations where doctors are pushing for deals and they're building in a 20% amount of a note on top of the practice so that they can get a deal done. Well, that should be a major warning sign that if it doesn't sell for what a lender will approve and they've got to carry a note back, I don't advise that anyway for a seller typically. It should be a warning to a buyer that we've got an issue with this practice, right?
And while you guys are in the business of selling practices, I'm sure that you have sellers over the years who have such unrealistic expectations that you say to them, I can't sell your practice for that price, and you can't take them. And that's what good, ethical people do. And that's why you're on this podcast. Any last thoughts as we put a bow on this podcast today, Dan, that you want to give to our listeners, both buyers and sellers, about kind of the whole process? You did covered a lot of ground, gave a lot of good advice, but any last thoughts before we put a bow on this?
I would just say for a seller's perspective, the time is great right now. I know you may be thinking about delaying. You get worried every day. You look at your retirement fund going up and down, based on those situations, but it does take a while. So when you talk about, wanting to sell your practice and you come to us and say, I'm ready to do it. I just want to make sure I'm done, by the end of the summer and can sell my practice. It's not always very realistic. Even if you've got a great practice, even even from the time we get a contract under place with a practice, which typically sometimes can take 6 months to even get there, it's another 90 days typically from when you get the contract in place to you close. So, you could be in a situation that is a 9-month practice, sale, and some, if it's urban or if it's rural or some of the other deals, it's could be
Longer.
a year and a
Yeah.
half. So
Yes.
prepare far enough ahead so that you're prepared for that timeline so you can weather that time frame if it's a little longer. Be realistic on your pricing. If you're going to push a higher price, understand what that really means and how that would apply. And then I would just say from the buyer's perspective, it's hard to take that plunge sometimes, but being an entrepreneur myself, I just encourage you to bet on yourself. Bet on yourself that this is the right move for you versus maybe some of the corporate dentistry options. There's still some great practices out there that you can live that kind of American dream of being your own boss and creating the right opportunity for people. So I guess that would be my last point, is that there's a lot of great practices right now, and you got to sometimes be aggressive. You can't wait too long. If it's a great practice, we might list one practice and have it under contract 3 days later. So if it's a good practice, be ready to move. Be ready to move.
That is true because sellers want to sell. And, sellers really think about, and the last thing is think about what you're going to do on the other side.
Oh yeah.
What are you going to do next? What's your next, and a lot of people who retire, not only dentists, but other people that I know in my life tell me they're busier in retirement than they were when they were working and they love it. But there are other people, I was talking to somebody the other day. It's like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I don't have any hobbies. I don't, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So these are things you need to think about. One more time, Dan, please give out your contact information if anybody wants to talk to Dan about, buying or selling a practice or just questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, I've known Dan over 20 years. He's one of the nicest people I know, and he'll be happy to spend some time talking to you and connecting you with the folks in your area because Henry Schein Transitions is nationwide, as I understand it.
Yeah.
Yes?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
Absolutely.
give out your contact information and please hang with me, but as we take the podcast out.
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, Dan.Van Eps at henryshine.com. Phone number is 303-906-6408. And if you want to just go to our website, it's Dental Practice Transitions, henryshine.com. Again, thanks so much, Art. This has been fun to catch up with you again and talk about
Always.
all this part of the business. So,
Well, your information was pristine. It was fantastic, and our listeners appreciate it. So, folks, again, I want to thank you for the honor and privilege of your time and listening to this podcast. You have lots of options out there, and we have a lot of people, thousands who listen to this podcast, and we appreciate every one of you. If you're in Las Vegas in last week of June, June 26th, I'll be speaking at the Academy of General Dentistry National Meeting at Caesar's Palace, and I will be talking about transitions, working with a couple of with a dental attorney and another gentleman, and we'll be talking about transitions in Las Vegas. Come up and say hi. Come say hi that you're a podcast listener. Maybe I'll buy you a cookie. I don't know. We'll see. Please, please go ahead and like us on all of the platforms. Like us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. Please tell all your friends about the podcast because I really believe we're in our 8th year. We're doing great stuff. And again, a wonderful, wonderful, again, thank you to our wonderful sponsors, Bank of America Practice Solutions. This is the official podcast of the Academy of Dental CPAs and Interview, a great, great dental device that you should take a look at. And with that, Dan Van Eps, thank you for your time and your expertise. And that will do it for this edition of the Art of Dental Finance and Management podcast with Art Wiederman, CPA. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.